Good morning. We'll call the regular meeting for the Economic Development Authority for Poquoson, February 4th, 2020 to order. Charity, if we can have a roll call, please.
Okay. Director Friedman is not here. Director Ward Costello is not here. Director Trent is not here. Director Bain?
Yes.
And Director Patrick? Present. Vice Chairman Metz?
Here.
And Chairman Booth.
Here.
So we do have a quorum.
Thank you. First order of action is consent agenda approval. There are two items on the consent agenda. First is the approval of the minutes from our December 3rd, 2019 meeting, and the second is our most recent financial statements. Any comments or discussion needed for the consent agenda? Hearing none, is there a motion for approval?
Second.
Motion by Mr. Metz.
That one?
Yep. Call for a vote, please.
Okay, Director Bain? Approved minutes. Director Patrick? Yes. Vice Chairman Metz? Aye. And Chairman Booth.
Aye.
Agenda approved.
Next item on the agenda is public comment. Seeing none, I think that we can proceed. We're pleased today to have Steve Harrison with HREDA to join us. Steve's prepared a brief presentation, and then following that, we certainly can grill him with questions as we see fit.
Steve, state first, you're Vice President for Business Intelligence, is that correct?
Yes, I am.
Okay, just to verify. And Steve had been with HREDA for a number of years, and then he was with Virginia Beach Economic Development Department, and he is back at HREDA again. So just to put a little background to it.
Good morning. Yeah, thank you, Charity, and thank you all for having me. I'm thrilled to be here to tell you a little bit about my department of the Alliance. I know my colleague Amy Jordan was here in December to tell you about some of the ways that the Alliance is sort of growing and evolving. Traditionally, we've really been the marketing arm of Hampton Roads. We've only sought out external business to come into the market, but as Amy probably told you a lot about, we are now looking at BRE, business retention and expansion as well, which is really where so much of the growth of industry comes from, and we think that the region can play a much larger role than it has to assist companies. But then we're also ramping up our business intelligence and research department to be more of a resource to our communities and to our investors to really help you understand your market, and then to not only do what we've always done traditionally, which is market to the outside world, but also to market to your existing companies to expand. So I thought I'd just give you a little bit of an overview of my department, which is business intelligence, and then I'd be happy to take your questions during or after this sort of brief PowerPoint presentation. So just as a reminder, the Alliance is a public-private partnership. We have 11 communities that are investors, Poquoson being one of them, and these are really the services that we have always provided. Everything is done free of charge, so we will talk to companies from all over the world, tell them about Hampton Roads and our 11 communities, and then serve as that single point of contact to essentially answer any question that they might have about doing business in Hampton Roads or in Virginia. And then business intelligence, we are kind of the information engine of the Alliance. And so just to give you a little bit of context for sort of what business intelligence means, VEDP, the Virginia Economic Development Partnership, has two departments. They have the Department of Research and the Department of Economic Competitiveness. We are really the catch-all for both of those departments at the region. And so research is that traditional looking up information about tax rates and incentives and things like that. Economic competitiveness is about using data to position yourself to be better suited for business. And so that's really what we try to do. We are proactively researching companies and proactively researching markets that we could potentially tap into. We're trying to be a central repository of data in Hampton Roads. I think that's one of the things that's most critical. And my first tenure at the Alliance, that was something that I was very interested in and something that I'd love to bring back, which is that if the regional group is saying the population of Poquoson is X, then it should be based on what the city of Poquoson is saying the population is. I think that's an easy way for people to see that the organizations are working well together. But if you have basic information where we're not singing from the same sheet of music, I think you kind of step out of the gate on a bad foot. Lead generation, that's something that we're working on. So we have our traditional business development arm, but we really would like to be an internal lead generation system. So that's something that we're ramping up now because there are only a few lead generation companies in the United States that work with economic developers. It's smaller than you would think. And so you have sort of a narrow pool of places to draw from. So we want to be our own resource. And then site readiness. So the state has done a lot of work on looking at available sites that are 25 acres and up that could be potentially turned around in a 6-month time frame. During the Amazon HQ2 process, a consulting firm that worked with the state actually found that the main reason Virginia loses projects is we did not have business-ready sites. So we didn't have sites that could be turned around in a proper time frame. And so that is something that we're working very closely with all of the communities of Hampton Roads that have 25+ acre sites, because we want these big projects, because as you guys know, those are spillover projects. They employ people who live and work in all of the communities. And so we're really trying to make sure that we have the capacity for some mega projects in Hampton Roads. So research, as I've often said, is the foundation of economic development. It is the ground floor. If you don't know what you're selling, you can't sell it. And so I thought this was just something to take a look at. So based on a study from Oxford Economics, the things that most people look at are obviously, is there property available? What is the workforce like? What's the cost and reliability of utilities, and just sort of the ease of which you can access all of that information, state and local taxes, of course, and then the regulatory climate. And those are things, as you know, that are often changing depending on state, federal changes. And so that's something that we have to compile and present on a variety of platforms on our website, hreda.com, because you get eliminated from projects before you even know that you were in the running, because people go to the website and say, Hampton Roads is or is not for me. So we need as much information publicly facing as possible. And then this is something that we actually have recently brought back, which is a research roundtable. And so the 11 communities and then some of our regional partners actually will meet on a bi-monthly basis just to discuss research topics. And so that is, what are you having trouble finding? I think one of the things that was helpful to me when I worked at Virginia Beach was actually just discussing with my fellow colleagues across city boundaries, I can't find this information, or I'm having trouble accessing something from the planning department or the commissioner of the revenue, and getting kind of best practices from across the region, because you can kind of let those walls down and discuss. And then some of these regional groups can come in and tell you about the amazing resources that they have, because I think a lot of it's untapped. The Port of Virginia has some incredible data that they can share, and it just kind of helps as we're all working to market the different cities. And then under that, we're now going to have a committee structure, which will be based on our target industries, and then the Research Roundtable will actually house its own committees. And so charity will be on one of those committees, and so the idea being that you can kind of dive deeper and come away with some tangible research to use for your community. So I think one of the great things about the Alliance, and particularly for a community that is a little bit smaller, is our tool set. I've talked to Dave and Charity a couple of times about this, that this is over $50,000 worth of subscriptions. So in my view, investing in the Alliance is actually a cost avoidance, because you don't have to invest in any of these things. That's our new goal, is that we subscribe to these things so you don't have to. But these are extremely important tools. CoStar is where most commercial real estate brokers put the information about the properties that they have available and seek out information about places to put their clients. And I'll go through a couple of these, and then I'll show you a few of them in a Poquoson specific example. But as I mentioned, we have target industries. Our target industries are based on a study that IBM did for us about 1.5 years ago. Those are shared services, software and IT, transport technologies, distribution, and food and beverage, which those, depending on the location in Hampton Roads, may be more or less attractive. But one of the great things about our tool set is that it's not specifically tailored to those. So we can also help you with all of these things, which may be more interesting depending on your particular need at the time. So retail or healthcare, defense contracting or agriculture. We have information that tells us about the demographics and the business climate of Hampton Roads. So that can be spread kind of across any industry you can think of. So just give you some quick examples of some of this information. So CoStar, which is really the leading source of commercial real estate data in America, it can give you data that you can't find anywhere else. So sorry that this is a little hard to read, but you can see market rent, and if it's increasing or decreasing, look at vacancy rates, and then market sale prices, and to see if they're increasing or decreasing. So those are things that are very helpful as you're trying to understand the market and where it's going. Gazelle is actually a pretty cool next generation tool, I would say. So it's essentially an AI-enabled platform that combs through articles and financial data and tries to rank companies from 1 to 5, 5 being that they are an on-fire, fast-growing company, 1 being a company that might be slowing or having some issues. And we think that's really going to help us a lot, not only in recruitment, but in BRE, because we want to look at the companies in Hampton Roads and say, who are our 5s? Who are the ones that we really need to get in front of so that not only we can help them expand, but they don't expand out of the market? And then who are the 1s and 2s that maybe some of the resources that our regional partners and our locality partners have could help them to get out of that sort of troubled range. So this is an example report. So the highest ranked company in Hampton Roads, which is probably not a huge surprise to any of you, is Dollar Tree. And so it looks, even though at some articles like that they had a push to remodel their stores recently to boost profits. Smithfield and Dominion were highly ranked as well. And so really we are planning to go through this and give each community a list of its 5s, 1s, and 2s. And then you can kind of work with the ones that you feel are a good fit for you, or you may know information that this hasn't combed through. But we think it's a good way to kind of understand where our existing companies are. Hoover's is it's really the most comprehensive list of companies that you can find, I would say, anywhere. It's based on Dun & Bradstreet data. It is a very good sort of sample, I would say. I have to often comb through this and update it because it's usually a little bit out of date, but I guess you can't blame them because they're trying to get a list of every company on Earth. So it's maybe a year behind, but the good thing is, especially when we're looking at our existing companies, we often know that. But if it's a publicly traded company, they have incredible data because all of that stuff is available much easier to them. So this is Huntington Ingalls, for instance. So you can really get good information, even sometimes on the company's financial health, which can help localities when they're looking at potential incentives, because you don't want to necessarily kind of put your neck out there for an incentive if a company maybe is not in the financial health that you would expect. And so we can look at some of that data behind the scenes as well. And then RS means, this is essentially something that traditionally we use for RFIs. We get RFIs that range from a couple of questions to, I have one in-house now that's 35 pages of questions. And so those questions run the gamut. We had one that asked us for the number of restaurants in Hampton Roads that had won a certain award, and I had never heard of the award, so you had to go find it. But we also get a lot of times, how much would it cost for me to build a 30,000 square foot warehouse in Hampton Roads? And it's pretty difficult to get that information as a one-off, but this is a very nice estimating tool that will give you, based on a brick front with block backup or bearing walls, this is an estimated sample. And then we will go out to our investors, particularly developers, and ask them if this sort of passes an initial review that we can send out to a company. So these types of things you kind of have to have at your disposal, because a lot of times you get these RFIs and they're due back the next day. And so if the data is not immediately available, you won't be able to finish it. And that's a way that companies sometimes can eliminate communities, because if you can't finish it quickly, we move on. So we make sure that that never happens. And then we use state and federal resource data that's available to us that I know you guys use as well. Obviously, the Virginia Employment Commission, VEDP, and if you haven't spent much time looking at VEDP's data, I would encourage you to do so. So I've been in the profession for about 10 years. It's the strongest organization it's ever been in that 10-year period, for sure. I think Stephen Murray has done an incredible job kind of realigning the resources of the partnership in a way that helped them get Amazon, but has really helped across the board. So I think you'll see a lot of new information and compelling information out of the partnership. And then we work with our partners at the Hampton Roads Planning District Council or Commission, the Workforce Council, and Reinvent Hampton Roads. So it really is, Doug Smith, who's our CEO, says that, and I think he's right, that the myth that Hampton Roads communities and organizations don't work well together is finally being dispelled, because, and Charity and I were just talking about this, how well these organizations work together and are starting to co-locate. So we have someone from VEDP that actually works in our office now. So these walls are coming down, and we're hopeful that that will help us to be more attractive to businesses and easier for everyone to access. And then this is just, I think, something that is interesting that you might not know, which is that the Alliance actually collects the cost of living data for Hampton Roads. So we send people out once a quarter to grocery stores, to department stores, and make calls to banks and things like that to determine these numbers, which it's fascinating. The list of items that you get from the grocery store is not really what you would expect. Like, it's 26 items. I don't think I buy any of those things when I go to the grocery store, but it's, like a particular type of sausage and a particular egg, and so it must be something that's available across the United States. But this data is something that can make you look really good or make you look really bad, depending, and I think you would agree the cost of living is slightly below the national average here, but that can depend on the store that you go to, obviously, and so we always are making sure that we're positioning ourselves to be an accurate representation of our true cost of living, and that it's not over or under what it really is. And so then this is just a little bit of a sample of how you can use some of that business intelligence data for Poquoson specifically. So I met with Dave and Charity, and we were talking a little bit about the Victory Boulevard property. And so I wanted to do a little bit of an analysis on potentially how it could be attractive to a retailer. So this gives you a little bit of data on that. So looking at Poquoson's gross regional product, so that's approximately $181 million per year, and it's broken down into these categories according to EMSI, which is a data resource that we use. And so I'm kind of looking today at retail trade, which is 7% of Poquoson's GRP. And I think that this type of information is interesting because it does help you understand sort of where the money's going, and if you want to shift resources, how do you do it? Looking at the population of Poquoson, so the Poquoson population increased by 1.6% in the past 5 years, and population is expected to increase by 2% in the next 5 years, which is a good sign. I think especially the population of Hampton Roads has stagnated a bit, so any growth is good because some of the communities have seen a slight decline. And that's something that if you look at 50-year projections and things is somewhat concerning, and something that we are working to change, because you do see projections of a decline in the population of Hampton Roads, and that's not something that you should see. I think a lot of it's based on economists' models that predict that the Department of Defense will scale back and things like that. So really what our goal is to diversify the economy away so that defense, rise and fall of expenditures does not, bring our region sort of to its knees if that happens. So this is the population of the labor force, of about 10,000 people. 8,400 are in the labor force, 6,200 are employed. And so this is just information that can help as you're actually putting together a packet to attract a retailer. I'll say that this is all for a retailer, but we're also about to begin a deep dive into office users. So I'm looking at available Class A and B office space across Hampton Roads, and there is about 2 million square feet of either vacant or available office space, which is concerning and something that we have to fix. And I think one of the things that I thought, but I was wrong, the data doesn't show it, is that it's about half and half split between the south side and the peninsula. About 45% of that office space is on the peninsula. So we really do need to focus harder on figuring out a way to bring office users. And so I think some of this data hopefully could also exist for an office user if that's something that you all are looking at for Victory Boulevard. So here's some information on the demographics. So the little USA shows you where the average is. And so Poquoson is slightly behind in some things and slightly ahead. I think veterans, obviously, we're blessed with that in this region, that we have far more than the national average. At violent crime and property crime is also well below the national average, which is great. And then the retiring soon, and depending on the way that you're looking at it, I mean, that also potentially means that there will be a good amount of people with disposable income and available time located within a very short proximity of some of these properties. So this is, as you know, your Victory Boulevard property. So the data is based on, I put a pinpoint kind of in the middle of that red box, and it's a 5, 10, and 15-minute radius from that exact site. So that shows you, and this is a drive time. Traditionally, you've seen sort of 1, 3, 5-mile radii, which is not really as effective, I think, especially for retailers, because it's, you know, they want to know who can get to my facility in a fairly short amount of time. So the red is where the data that I've got focuses on, but I've got all of the reports that I use to get this information that I'll give to Dave and Charity after this meeting. So 5 minutes from this site, there's 10,000 people, 3,784 households. The median age is about 45. The median household income, which I'm sure you're not surprised about, is very high, $105,649. The average household income, $129,000. So that's a very compelling case for, I think, any retailer, because those are well above the regional, state, national average. So it's definitely a good place, I think, for the right retailer to open up. This gives you a little bit more information, and I think just wanted to showcase how much you can dive into the data. So within 5 minutes of the site, 18% have a high school diploma, 28% have some college, and over half have a bachelor's or graduate or professional degree. So you have a very well-educated populace. 76% of them are employed in what's referred to as a white-collar job. So I think 258 businesses with 2,293 employees are within 5 minutes, and the unemployment rate's very low. So it's a very robust group of people that I think are doing well economically and would provide good data to support for an office user or for a retailer. And then this is just some of the information that I pulled from the retail and restaurant market potential, and so I wanted to share a couple of these with you because I think they're very interesting, and it's amazing to me that with data now you can find out this stuff. I don't know how they know it, but so people within 5 minutes are 33% more likely than the average person to own an iPhone. They're 33% more likely to have attended a live theater event in the last 6 months, and they are 43% more likely than the average person to have exercise at a health club at least 2 times per week. So that is a strong case for Planet Fitness, a One Life Fitness, something along those lines. And then on the restaurant side, they're 22% more likely to have eaten at a Longhorn Steakhouse, 21% more likely to have eaten at an Olive Garden, 56% more likely to have eaten at Panera, and I was talking about this with Charity too, 54% more likely to have gone out for fine dining. So, and I think that speaks to the fact that those incomes are very good. So it's a strong, robust market 5 minutes away from the site. And then, so you kind of take that data and then determine which companies to go after. So this is some research that I was looking at from Cushman and Wakefield. And as you know, I mean, with Amazon and things, the American retail market is changing rapidly, and brick and mortar stores. It's interesting because, you know, you hear about the retail apocalypse. From what I've read, a lot of that is actually kind of overstated, and that a lot of brick and mortar is still very strong, but you're seeing a realignment based on the types of things that people are more likely to want to buy close to home versus buy online. So 10,000 stores closed nationwide in 2019, and some major brands that I think we see in almost every community, like Payless and Gymboree and Dress Barn. But we also saw major growth plans from other companies, Dollar General and Dollar Tree, and those are both headquartered here, which certainly works well. Starbucks, Dunkin' Donuts, O'Reilly Automotive, Aldi, which I think, especially with the Farm Fresh site and things, that Aldi and Lidl are starting to blanket the market. And so there's potential for, I think, growth there. So really, the hope is that the data can then tell the story to the retailers that you might want. And with so many of these companies, you can kind of come up with specific packets and send it their way, work with the commercial brokers in the region, and hopefully get in front of the decision makers. And so it sometimes is a confusing market, I think, for retailers, so we have to tell that story. I worked for the city of Virginia Beach, and we sent stuff to IKEA for years, and they said for years that we were not a market they would ever consider. And it opened in this market, not in Virginia Beach, but close by, and they did very well. It was one of their best openings in years. So I think even though they have incredible data, we know the story of Hampton Roads much better, I think, and so sometimes we have to dispel myths. And I mean, you'll even see people that will say, well, the peninsula is one market, the south side's another market, but the data doesn't support that. There is a lot of commerce that moves back and forth. And so when you have all of that data to push together, it really does present a strong case. So just as some next steps for sort of what I'll do with that, so we're going to continue to do what we've always done for you all, which is to market Poquoson as a great place to do business. There's about 10 reports that data came from that I've got right here that I'll give to Dave and Charity. And then we really want to just continue with our regional economic development team meetings, the research roundtable, and these committees to dive deeper into this data so that we can help not only attract companies to Hampton Roads, but to Poquoson specifically with your help. And then we're available at the disposal of Charity and Dave to help with information. So as you all get requests for information, as we see things that we think are a good fit for you, we push that data to your community, and the hope is that we're an easy to work with partner that can provide data very quickly to you and make a stronger case. And I did want to mention that years back, we had an office on the peninsula. We have one again, which I think is important and exciting. So our office just reopened in the Tech Center in Newport News. So 700 Tech Center Parkway, Suite 200. So we're right down the street, and certainly are excited to kind of ramp up activity on the peninsula again and work with you kind of in a whole new way. And yeah, so that's sort of the main information. You'll see us rebrand a little bit, I think, in the next year. We're starting to refer to ourselves more as the Alliance and less as HREDA, because HREDA will probably go away, but the marketing experts will help us determine what that should actually be. But we are excited about working, with you guys in Poquoson, and I've told Dave and Charity this, but as sort of like a point of personal pride. I was here a lot when I was a kid. My dad built the building that William E. Wood built, the Coast Guard facility on Wythe Creek Road, and so that, I think, is the thing he was most proud of in his career. So it was exciting to get to come over here a lot, and I always thought that was just a beautiful piece of property. So yeah, Poquoson's a beautiful place, and we're thrilled to hopefully be able to bring more prospects to see it and more executives to live here, because I know a lot do. So be happy to answer any questions.
You kind of touched on this. I guess I wasn't really in sync, but I saw the movement. Somebody came up with, we're now the 757.
Right.
So is that why HREDA is going to go away, or what are y'all going to be called?
So we probably won't brand ourselves the 757. 757, I think, is being used kind of more of as a regional pride building campaign, if you will. So like OBX or RVA. They did a study where they looked at, should we be called Hampton Roads, should we be Coastal Virginia, and they actually found that whichever name you picked, about half of the population really hated the other name. So I think we felt like you really we're not to the point yet where you select a name, because there's got to be a little bit more coalition building. 757 was something that a lot of people used informally, and so it was like a lot of people's second choice. And so the idea is you start with 757, we kind of create this regional identity, and then maybe at some point the name becomes more apparent. But for now, we'll probably stay Hampton Roads in some sort. We may just shorten our name because it's so long. Like we have these 6-second videos we put on LinkedIn, and we're like, but it takes 6 seconds to say Hampton Roads Economic Development Alliance. So we will probably shorten it a little bit, but 757 might be in the tagline, but yeah, it won't be, because one of the things about us is that we have the internal market, but the external too, and externally people wouldn't know 757 most likely, so.
I'm glad you said that. I mean, I thought it was wacky. I mean, I was at our industry conference a month ago, and this happens every year, but you're out there dealing with people from all over the country, and I mean, I can tell you from firsthand experience that when you tell somebody Hampton Roads, pretty good chance they'll look at you cross-eyed. 757, they're gonna laugh.
Right.
Because they're not gonna identify themselves as their area code. And so, you know, ultimately, I always just said I'm from Virginia Beach or Norfolk. But the one thing that does make sense is coastal Virginia. It tells you where you are, has a little sizzle with the name coastal. People get that. But the idea of saying I'm from the 757 is, it's laughable. I mean, so I hope that's not what they really do.
Yeah, I think the way it was sort of written about and everything, it was a little bit misleading in that they never intended for it to be the name, but a lot of the articles
That's how it came across to me.
and that's how it was written.
Definitely
Yeah.
came across to me.
Yeah, and to me too, reading it, but I know that the point was supposed to be that it's not the name, because, like you said, nobody would know what that
Yeah,
means
I was
out
like,
of the
would they get
market.
a bunch
But
of high school kids to do this?
Right.
Yes, actually millennials. And millennials.
Do that. My daughter sent me some things. In fact, at the meeting with one of the pre-announcement meetings, an older gentleman, and I say that as an older person, he said, you know, I was just so against it, and then all of a sudden, my granddaughter or daughter or something texted me and said, how are things in the 757? He said, well, I guess it's true. I
Well, it's
guess
great
they
for
use
slang.
this.
I mean, it's fine for slang.
Well,
But not for a professional.
what it goes, but I don't think coastal Virginia's going away. Tourism has adopted coastal Virginia very strongly, and Hampton Roads is historical. It's always gonna be there, in one form or another, but they're just trying to find something that they can refer to the area that people can agree on, and it's been a challenge.
It has, yeah. I think, well, it's interesting in that I think people closer to the water maybe identified more with coastal Virginia. People in the western part of the region really disliked it, and so then it kind of came to that point of like, we didn't want to divide the region further, so let's come around 757 as that branding like RVA, but externally it will still be probably whatever it was called. So for tourism, it'll still be coastal Virginia. For economic development, we'll still use Hampton Roads, and then the hope is that we can kind of continue that discussion, I think, for the
Next 20 years.
yeah.
In addition to that, then, if I'm curious how the HREDA feels about combining from Richmond all the way down to, as a region.
Right, as a mega region.
Where do you all stand on that?
I think that we see opportunities for that, without a doubt. So we've are in discussions with the Greater Richmond Partnership, which is sort of our counterpart up there, on different initiatives, and there's definitely some opportunities, I think, for mega region collaborations, and specifically in areas where we're much stronger together. The biosciences, for instance, I think if you combine the two, you have a stronger story to tell. And so I think, yeah, to some extent, we're certainly supportive of that. There's some things I think that, you know, our region is somewhat distinct from theirs, and so it's kind of a collaboration, but I think that there's a lot to be said for working across Virginia localities, because the region, really the Richmond to Virginia Beach region, it is stronger together in many ways, but Hampton Roads there is that sort of dead zone between the two, and so like that kind of separates the market to some extent.
Made reference to business-ready sites and the fact that 25 acres historically had been the benchmark and above.
Right.
And I thought when Amy was here, she made a statement that there was some internal push to take that 25-acre metric down to some lower number for kind of in-region business expansion and growth opportunities. Can you speak any to that, or am I remembering incorrectly?
No, you're right. So we started about a year ago with 100 plus acre sites and went through that iteration, and then pushed down to 25 plus with the state. So the state came in to help us with the 25 plus. But once we kind of gather all that data and push for an initial Go Virginia grant for the sites that qualified, then the goal is that this is not a one-time static look at these sites, but that we add in smaller sites. And so that's really when we'll do that, and we'll work with the communities to kind of take the business-ready sites model that we worked on in conjunction with VEDP and the PDC and use it for lower tiered, bigger sites and then smaller sites. So yeah, absolutely. I think that'll be an ongoing thing.
So are you familiar with the definitions of what they're applying to business ready? I mean, I heard the 6-month mark, but I didn't know if.
Yeah, so tier 4, and so it's a 1 to 5 tiering system that was mostly developed by Timmons and then sort of tweaked by the partnership. But tier 4 and 5 are essentially business ready sites, and what that means is that they can be turned around within about a year, but that all the permitting is in place, like geotechnical work, all of the sort of soil borings and things have already been done, that the infrastructure is readily available or could be made readily available fairly quickly, and that the zoning is in place and things like that for what its intended use is. So it's basically kind of getting it to that point that it could be made ready in short order.
So it's not necessarily pad ready, meaning, hey, bam, show up, build a building.
Right.
Move on.
I think that's like a tier 5, but tier 4 is really all we need to get to. And tier 4 is like you could make it pad ready in 6 to 12 months. Yeah.
Any questions or comments for Steve?
Alan, I mean, you have that commercial real estate end that I was questioning for, especially retail, but office and the different users. I mean, is there any information that we should try to obtain from Steve in the office with regard to that, to try and develop a more specific marketing plan?
Wow, probably out of my scope. I mean, I'm pretty impressed by this day and age, how much depth of information there is, which is kind of beyond my knowledge base. But I mean, I would encourage you guys to stay in the loop with them. I think with us not having those big, 25 acre plus sites, I think our, tendency maybe is to get a little bit off the radar. And we got to find that one special user who's, who for some reason can just fit on our little, pieces that we have. And I'm not sure what the magic, we've never really, we've reached out to brokers ourselves. We've tried to do different things, but I think, stay in touch, because I'm guessing when you guys have somebody that wants 5 acres, it doesn't really, the bells don't really ring that hard. So I worry that we could get off your radar a little bit. So.
I think, so it depends. We work on some of these mega projects, but we work with companies that are going to hire 1 person, 2 people. So we'll work just as hard on those and trying to, because especially as we've seen with, like, for instance, international companies that are coming over here, it's usually a very small startup, but those companies turn into steel and hire 2,000 people and leave hair. And so the hope is that we're bringing companies in that will have longevity. So I think definitely that's a good point, and we try to push information out every time we get a lead or anything, so that you know kind of who it is. And what we do too is send out a sheet that essentially says, here's where we think they're a good fit. If you think we're wrong, let us know. Or like if there's a site we didn't see that you know of that could be made available, for instance. So yeah, we definitely try to keep in really close contact with Dave and Charity. But you're right, absolutely. We want to find that special user that maybe is for a smaller space, backfilling, the farm fresh here, or these, 8 acres or so that you guys have out on Victory Boulevard, like looking for that right tenant. So.
Well, actually leads into something else. I guess a good forum to talk about it, but obviously our 8 acres, that's up there on the screen. But what about when we have something like privately owned, the farm fresh, or an Owens Marina site? connectivity on that? I mean, do you guys have that on your radar?
Oh, yeah.
Otherwise, that's gonna just be lost in never, never.
We've reached out, and Charity particularly has had those substantive conversations with the ones you just referenced. You know, things are ever-changing, obviously, in restaurants, retail, and that sort of thing. But one of the things that we want to make sure is never lost on anyone is that we, of course, market the city and the EDA's property, but, of course, the other privately held commercial property is equally of value and focus for us because the tax dollars are going to come if we're able to make sure that there are tenants in those locations.
I just didn't know where you drew the line. For instance, again, we'll pick on Owens. That's not probably a site that's you're in any way authorized, if that's the right word to talk about. But at the same time, it would be nice to know in the back of your mind that, hey, if an opportunity needed something like that, hey, whisper or whatever, but otherwise it's being put out there even though it's not officially available. I mean, your mom wants that, or
Well, I usually contact those people and just inquire what their intent is first. I mean, do they want some help, or are they gonna do something themselves, or do they want something else? So make those inquiries and then, try and assist in the way that's appropriate, beneficial, but definitely look at that. But the point I was thinking about with this is sort of setting the stage. We're trying to develop a market plan to try and do some more promotion, and this is assistance from HREDA is to obtain some data to back up the kind of marketing that we would like to do. So I just wanted everybody to make sure and ask all the questions. And
I have a question for you. One of your slides had that your kind of upper income, 5-minute drive from here was 10,300 people.
Right.
For retail space. Not or anything. Is that, are they looking for 20,000 in that area? Are they, where's the sweet spot population-wise on that? If they would make a decision that they could make a go of it there.
It depends a lot on the individual retailer. So I think that's a pretty strong number. I think that it, especially for a restaurateur and things like that. But a lot of it, I think, is going to depend. They're going to look at the behavior of the people within that area. So Walmart, for instance, they have a lot of these tools and other tools. I've met with someone that does the research for them, and they said they know more about us than we know about ourselves. So they know in a certain neighborhood that those people are X% more likely to buy bananas than, the average consumer. And so a lot of them, we have to push this information to them once we see things that we think fit their model. So with some of this information, I think it's going to be kind of pushing it to the companies of like the consumer spending patterns here go in line with what we think you would be looking for. But I think that's a strong case to make, but so much of it will depend on which retailer you're looking at. Exactly.
I have two questions. One of them, you mentioned that the peninsula has 45% available retail space in comparison.
Office space.
Office space. How much of that is in Poquoson? Do you know that?
I have it. I don't know it off the top of my head, but I can get that to you guys. But,
And then what is your total coverage area for that?
so we look at the 11 communities that we represent. So that would be on the south side, Virginia Beach, Norfolk, Chesapeake, Portsmouth, Suffolk, Isle of Wight, Franklin, Southampton, and here on the peninsula, Hampton, Newport News, and Poquoson. So
Just the three cities
right,
on the peninsula.
yeah. So Greater Williamsburg is sort of its own thing. We're sort of a partner organization with them, but so it didn't include those numbers.
And my other question is, you had statistics about household sizes and information like that. Do you have information about millennials in the workforce and what that looks like for this area?
We do, yeah. So the millennial workforce in Hampton Roads is actually pretty strong. You'll see we get accolades often on that show that we have the highest percentage of millennials of any metro area in the United States. That's mostly because of the military. But there's 100,000 college students enrolled in Hampton Roads at any given time, and a lot of them tend to be millennials as well. So there is a strong millennial workforce here. The goal is just that we have to keep them. So about 15,000 people exit the military annually in Hampton Roads, and we estimate that about 8,000 of them want to stay. So
How many?
8,000, so about a little over half. That number is kind of always shifting, but it's about capturing that workforce and keeping them here. And so I think that's where you see a lot of this branding and things like that, actually geared toward the 757 stuff. A lot of that's geared towards the millennial generation, so.
Yeah, I saw studies that said by the year 2025 that there'll be half of the workforce at least.
I think that's right.
That's something that we as an economic development agency were attracted.
Yeah, and it changes the way that people want to work. So, I mean, as you see the rise of these co-working facilities like Gather in Newport News and Norfolk, it's a much more mobile workforce. So I'm technically a millennial, but I don't think I ascribe to a lot of those characteristics. I'm 33 going on 83.
not, so.
But yeah, but from what I read about people slightly younger than me, I think that it is a different way to utilize traditional space. And that's not only office space, but that's retail space as well. So I think you're absolutely right, is keeping an eye on that generation because they're going to be the majority of the workforce very shortly.
I appreciate everything you did centered around retail, and everyone's always kind of envisioned there being some retail solution, but given our partners, our neighbors with NASA Langley, with Huntington Ingalls, and I don't even know what sector it would fall in, but with the landing of the transatlantic cables in Virginia Beach, technology, science, technology, research side of it, there's a lot of defense companies that are spinning off into publicly available technology deployment.
Absolutely.
And so I don't know, is there some data out there that we should be looking towards or mining within this broader technology, communications? It has spin-off effects to this millennial, I don't work in a traditional office, telecommuting environment.
That's a good question. I think you're right that the IT environment, as it's shifting, that is advantageous to us because we are a good market for it with these transatlantic cables, but then aerospace-related IT surrounding NASA Langley is huge. We've seen a lot of actually renewed interest in that. We've gotten a lot of leads in the aerospace sector in the past year that I think had not been there before, and a lot of it's IT related. So that's something that we're trying to really dive into as deep as we can and work with partners like Huntington Ingalls and some of these companies that are already here and have a lot of these resources to figure out like how can we be more attractive to similar companies as they're setting this stuff up.
Well, personally, I would be interested in hearing some of that feedback as you learn it, if you can
Absolutely.
give that back through Charity and Dave, because I think that the city is strategically positioned in that there's a large portion of that workforce that lives in Poquoson, they just work within these sectors.
Absolutely.
And so these spin-off private opportunities that kind of evolve from these.
I think you're right.
I think.
And so that's one of the things that these new committee structure is going to help us with, we think, as well. So there's a target industry committee for each of our 5. So IT is a specific target industry committee. And that's mostly made up of private sector representatives who can kind of speak to us about the reality on the ground. So Doug, our CEO, often tells the story of he was the city manager of Norfolk, and the Alliance brought in ADP, which is great, hired hundreds of people, but he was meeting with CEO of PRA, which is also in Norfolk, and the CEO of PRA was like, it's great, ADP is here, but ADP hired away a lot of my people, and so now I have to go retrain and find new people, and so we need those conversations to be had as we're doing lead generations and things so that they can say, if you do this, this is going to happen, and so we need to set up something with ODU, with Thomas Nelson, so that there is training available to make the company be successful and not to the detriment of a company that's already here.
There was just an article last week about the Amazon effect. It's happening on other businesses.
Yeah.
So,
And
it's
it's
only just begun.
exactly, and we really don't want it to be sort of one-offs, so where a company maybe plugs a hole for themselves when the region could plug the hole for every company that's here and could come here. So like if, for example, some of these companies have a lot of human resources people, so they'll do a one-off with ODU to train their workers, but maybe ODU could set up a certificate program that could train anybody's workers. So those are the types of discussions that we're trying to have more often, and we're in conjunction with not only ODU, but the community colleges, because a lot of that stuff happens at Thomas Nelson and Tidewater and Paul D. Camp. So there's a lot to be done, and we're trying to have the discussion sort of more out in the open so that we can be ready to make sure that the companies succeed. and IT is a huge portion of it. They often say that Virginia is the cloud, that I think 70% of internet traffic passes through Virginia every day, because Ashburn and Northern Virginia is sort of data center alley. So we should be able to take a piece of that and capitalize on that, especially because these cables are coming into Hampton Roads. And so we have to kind of strike while the iron's hot.
Anything else for Steve? Certainly, thank you for your time.
Absolutely.
And the data is
Great presentation.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for having me.
Outstanding.
At this point, we would move to staff activities. Any updates on ribbon cuttings at this point?
We do have the 185 that we were talking about prior to the meeting, our cooking lady catering who does the seafood festival, VIP tent, and a number of different things. Anyway, she is opening for catering and also a restaurant called 185 in the previously Scorpio's Deli space on Little Florida Road. She should be opening. We're going to have a ribbon cutting for her scheduled for February 20th.
And the former, just talking about 185, in fact, I went by there early this morning, and it's right on Little Florida Road, obviously, and the name that they've taken is the actual address, which I think is pretty neat. The sign that they have, that they've constructed and placed is just fantastic. It's eye-catching and classy, and I think they'll do well. Everybody knows Lenora Garland anyway. She has a very successful catering business, which again will work out of there, but she'll be open for breakfast and lunch, 6:30 a.m. to 2:30 p.m., Wednesday through Sunday. There's just a lot of excitement that that's going to be.
Breakfast and lunch only?
At this point. I think she may do some private, Wednesday through Sunday, 6:30 to 2:30, and I think they may do some additional private gatherings. I don't think they've established all of that yet, and I think it's also welcome news that we understand from Chris Bennett, the owner of Surf Rider, that they will officially reopen on Monday, March the 2nd, and we're all very pleased to hear that.
EDA gets free.
We didn't actually have that discussion. But I can tell you that from the city standpoint, we're very, very excited, and I know the community is as well. And I know that Chris and all of his staff are excited. Very pleased that that once the that unfortunate incident with the fire happened, that they basically immediately said, we're going to be rebuilt right here. And the Browns, of course, been very supportive, and it's great for the city. So we're happy that the spring will see the Surf Rider back in business.
Any final comments from anybody? Hearing none, our next meeting will be on Tuesday, March 3rd at 8:30 back here in council chambers. With that, we can adjourn.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Steve, that was fantastic.
Got that on the calendar.
With another. We're struggling with space.